It's preparing to live stream the meeting.
So should we
Trying.
start the show?
Not until it shows. We are not live.
Oh, we're live now.
Okay, yeah, we are
Hi,
live now.
everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
We have been
This is what
having
happens
major
when we have
technical
no
issues.
power. Go, Mike. It's your turn.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Raising Excellence, the most important 75 minutes of your day today. Today's show, hello, I'm Michael, and I'm the MC and Opportunity Ambassador. Today's title is Cope with This, Asshat.
And that's what we've been doing all afternoon, is coping with stuff.
I need to
All
change
about
the settings so
coping stuff.
that it shows that Agnieszka is actually here. It's only showing people with video.
Well, maybe I can just be the disembodied voice on your wall.
Ooh.
I'm here in spirit.
All right,
Halloween
well, let's
approaching.
announce my co-host. We'll start with Agnieszka, our psychosomatic illuminator.
Hello, everybody. I apologize for my lack of video. We are on scant resources at this time.
Willow, our trauma consultant
Hi, everyone.
and technical advisor today. And Dennis, our freedom
scary.
facilitator.
Greetings and blessed love, everybody.
Hey, on Monday it was Dennis that was the technical advisor. Now it's Willow.
This is true.
We're moving up in the world. Hey, Willow, maybe we should advertise on Facebook the link to this video on Facebook so they can find us too.
We should.
Sorry, I can't be more helpful today. So, boys,
Well,
what are we talking about?
today's show, we're talking about coping mechanisms. Who wants to lead off with this idea?
Well, this is Willow's topic, but because she is doing the announcements, I think we should talk about our coping mechanisms while she's getting ready.
I approve that, yes.
So I've had to go through some coping mechanisms today because, well, there was no power because a tree fell on the power lines, and there's still no internet, but I am on my phone, but it wasn't working very well with video, so we were trying to make it work, and now we're coping with me being on video or no video, just audio. And we were going to record the show, but I thought, you guys, it's not really cool. So without my computer, we can only go on one software. And so YouTube it is. And so we're live on YouTube today, just for our YouTube listeners. Thank you so much for listening and being there. What about you, boys? What kind of coping mechanisms are you dealing with?
So you said you were going to describe some coping mechanisms, but you just kind of described a opportunity for a coping situation, but never got to the coping mechanism.
Well, the mechanism is that I chose to use my phone and no video, and I still showed up.
Okay.
Instead of eating chips in my pajamas. And,
that's the coping mechanism. The chips. Just because you didn't use it doesn't mean it's not the coping mechanism that we would need to hear about.
Well, I don't know if chips are really my go-to. I would say more like cheesecake or whipped cream kind of would be more my style. But
yes, both. I agree with both.
All right, Dennis, you got anything as far as coping mechanisms?
It seems like with me, it's just the contrary. Like, if things are stressing me out, then actually I stop eating, and I tend to, take everything else more important, and you have to get this done and that and this work and finish that first, and then after you can relax. But then often it seems like the relaxing part never really chips in. And then it's then like I will push back eating, I will push back relaxing, I will push back sleeping, and so that would be a mechanism, like maybe a tendency that I can observe, if things get stressful or so.
Well, maybe we should define what a coping mechanism is, because to me, I think it could be a lot of different things. But who wants to give us a definition of what coping mechanism is?
A coping mechanism, and this isn't like the official definition. It's just kind of how I help to explain what this is. It is any tactic good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter, that helps you deal with an event without losing control. And it
So
could be
it
a
could
singular
actually,
event.
it could be some of the things that a lot of us are addicted to, right?
Addictions are coping mechanisms. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Because I think we've all got those in one
Absolutely.
shape, form, or another.
To be honest, you can't be a human and not develop coping mechanisms. It's just not possible. You have to learn how to deal with certain situations. Most of the time, when people are talking about a coping mechanism, what they're talking about are bad things. Like, this is how, like smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, overeating, over exercising, as Dennis was saying, avoiding all of these things, like avoiding eating, avoiding drinking, just kind of like pushing through it. That's another coping mechanism. And other ones are blanking on me right now, but there are numerous amounts of coping mechanisms. And then these are all the
What
ones
about
that-
just checking out? Just general, like, I'm not
disassociation,
here.
numbing. Yes.
I'm just gonna go to bed and stay there for 3 days.
Yes, that's usually my go-to, to be honest. That's the one that's like the ultimate go-to, where it's like, okay, if I really just can't handle this, I know that I can check out. I know that I don't have to be here. I can deal with the consequences of that later, and I know what that's going to be like, so I'm prepared to handle it. And it's taken me a really long time to learn how to be present in my own body, because I can disassociate on command almost, where it's just like, nope, peace out, I'm gone.
That's an interesting one. That seems something rather difficult to me. Like, even like from a mental perspective, you know, even in those situations, like I feel like and it's not like anybody else is demanding that from me, but it's from within, so I can observe myself. Like I have this, like I know I have the physical capacity, to last long and to, go and work and do another one and do another hour and do another this and that. And then I kind of, this thing kind of bypasses me. Like, okay, you can just check out. That for me feels like, or, like giving up, or, like this letting go, and you call it like disassociating, or like stepping out of the situation and completely just detached from it. That's like when I'm stressed out, and so that's a challenge, that I really have to, make myself aware of, in order to do just that, in order to be able to, take a step back and look at it, say, okay, let's sleep over it, or whatever, let's drink a tea and come back in another hour, or let's actually get some sleep and then wake up, and although a night would have passed, but then maybe I can do it much more effectively. And or like to see that, all right, if I push through right now, I can do the work and stuff, but it's not really that effective. So maybe if I get some sleep and I wake up, it will be a few hours delay, but I will do it faster, and maybe I have better results, even than forcing myself and pushing through.
So I had two comments to make about that. Is one, it is dissociation is actually a coping mechanism that you learn pretty young, like, or with very extreme situations. So it's not something that most people have to have alcohol to feel numb. Most people have to have some sort of excuse me, chemical substance to feel that numbness. And a lot of people will use cannabis. And while cannabis is a very healthy choice, it's probably one of the better choices, the ones that I actually advocate for, if it sets well with you. But most people need like alcohol, they need cannabis, they need hard drugs. They have to do things that make them disassociate, or make them feel numb. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is, when you're talking about like, I'm going to step out for a cup of tea, or I'm going to take a step back, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like disassociation is when you are sitting face to face with someone else, and they have been talking to you, and you literally don't remember any of the conversation. Your mind just checked out. It's not there anymore. Your mind actually hovers somewhere back here, and it's like a mild blackout, where there have been times where, like, my husband has mentioned, oh yeah, we watched this movie together, And I have no recollection of watching that movie. I know that we have watched it together, but when I go to watch it, I have no memory of watching it. There's nothing that registers in my mind, is because my brain was not fully there at the time. So when people talk about disassociation, that's what they're meaning. Instead of just, saying, I'm going to take a break and take a step back, or I'm going to spend the night and, rest and think about it. It's a little different. Although one of my coping mechanisms, and it's a genetic, it's a biological thing, which they're all biological processes, but my narcolepsy will kick in when things are too much. So if it's too intense, I will just get a sleep attack, and my body will be like, "No, go to sleep. You're not going to deal with this. I'm going to make you not be able to deal with this."
So and when we're talking about coping, we're talking about coping in a situation in which it's a high stress circumstance, or is there other possible circumstances that this would come about?
It causes a situation that would cause you enough stress that you don't know how to deal with any other way. So,
Okay.
like, imagine you're at work, or you're in your house and you get into a fight with someone that you respect or that you can't just brush it off. Things escalate to a certain point. A lot of people who smoke cigarettes will be like, "I need to go have a cigarette." And you can see it on their face where it's just like, "I'm going to lose my shit if I don't go have a cigarette. I need to do this." It's not a conscious, it's like, it's a conscious decision between I'm going to lose my shit or I'm going to do this. And that can, like, it doesn't have to be like just one intense thing. It could be, I know that I'm going to lose my shit today if I don't drink, if I don't do this, or if I don't exercise explicitly. This is where like healthy coping mechanisms come into play. If you know that you're probably going to go off on someone or damage a relationship or threaten your job by, losing it, but you know that you can stop that from happening by either drinking in the morning or exercising profusely in the morning. People who have the will to exercise profusely will usually go exercise, which I'd say is a better coping mechanism than drinking in the morning. But those healthy coping mechanisms, even if you're using a healthy coping mechanism, if you're not dealing with the underlying issue, it can turn into an excessive coping mechanism that's actually harming you. This is where you get people who work out, 7 days a week, they never take a day off, and they always push themselves, and come to find out they're still dealing with issues, and they're using that healthy coping mechanism way, way too much.
So hang on, does that mean that Dennis does not have any unhealthy coping mechanisms? He's still the goody two shoes?
I'd say he's probably the healthiest out of all of us, yes.
Definitely goody two shoes. But if you were
I can
read. Go.
Go ahead, Agnieszka.
No, go. I'm just being silly.
Well, I was going to say, when I was, I had a regular job when I first got out of the Army. It was working at a metal fabrication shop and chrome plating thing. It was pretty rough, but I would come home from work and I had a heavy bag set up in the garage, and I would just punch that bag for 20 minutes, and then I could get on with the rest of my evening if I was but I would have to do that every freaking day because it was just so, there was stupid stuff going on, and just you wanted to hit people.
Yep. I often have to employ a coping mechanism for the anger because it's different, but it's also very similar. I couldn't work off my anger in jiu-jitsu because I was learning. So I couldn't like go hard and like really get it out of there, but I would use music. So I'd put on like the heaviest rah song that I could, and imagine I'd let my daydreams kind of like run with me for a little bit, just for this little bit of time. And I talked to my support group meeting about this, and I call it a scheduled breakdown, where you go to that place that you know that you can't deal with any at any other time, but you only do it for a certain period of time. So for the length of the song, I am furious and I exact revenge or justice or whatever pops to mind, and then I let it go because it served its purpose. It's like a mental punching bag for me.
I recognize now that, not now, like even Monday when we were talking about it, that was like kind of the first thing that came to my mind, and that's like if I confront myself on a like on a mental level, like with too much of supposedly the things that go wrong in the world, and it becomes really heavy and really it gets really dense, then something that I for quite a while now have been doing is the coping mechanism. I call it half jokingly, but it is in a way like memes, those sometimes funny, oftentimes politically incorrect pictures that go around and that I sometimes share with certain people. That for me, that stands for humor in a way, because I value that, and that's something that changes my emotional state in a moment, and it does something to me if I know that others also can laugh it off or can laugh about it or can share in that notion of of fun that moment that I have, even looking at something serious, but like finding a way of how to look at the situation and still laughing in the in the face of the devil, so to say. Yeah, so I realize that that's something that kind of helps me of coping and of seeing things not only from that heavy and dense side, but also finding a different angle on the situation, even though it's it's something serious.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's one that I often forget about, even though it's one that I use. Maybe not on a regular basis, but I will use it. But humor is a fascinatingly useful coping mechanism that people don't even realize that it is a coping tool. You're not just doing it to be funny. Like you're using the being funny to raise the mood of the whole room and actually manage a situation that you don't know how to handle another way. Or maybe that's the best way to handle it.
Certainly a lot of positives to humor, as we discussed on Monday. And laughing,
Yeah.
of course.
Yes.
Agnieszka, do you got anything to add? Been very quiet.
It's just not the same being on not video and being outside in the jungle listening to you guys. I feel more like a participant than a contributor. I was thinking that Dennis is the reason why the expression meme storm was invented. So, just saying.
He does occasionally hit those up.
There's a few.
There are other coping mechanisms. Like we're talking about things that are drastic, checking out for 3 days or drinking in the morning or whatever. But people have like a million coping mechanisms. Like I remember when I used to work in an office, I would have that specific pastry or whatever that I had to get at specific times when I was having a bad day. It would have to be this very thing from this one cafe. And if it was closed, it would be like a bad day because it couldn't be the other one. You know what I mean? It had to be this one. Because that's the one that healed everything and made everything better. And those are not it's childish, but I was an adult when I was having these dependencies on a specific. It wasn't like just anything. Couldn't just have anything.
So you actually reminded me. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Agnieszka, you reminded me of a coping mechanism. It's a healthy coping mechanism that I kind of took on a little bit. It's what you were talking about, have something in your life, and you suggested it be my coffee, which it's not my coffee, but you suggested that you should have something similar to or like having your coffee and having complete control over it. So if coffee were the thing that I choose, it'd be like no one else gets to make my coffee. I make my coffee. I make my coffee in a specific order and I do it every single time. What this is actually giving you psychologically is a sense of control over your life, which is incredibly important, especially for children, because you reminded me when you said like it's childish. Yeah, it is. But there's nothing bad about having a childish, like, it's not inherently wrong to be childish. You just have to understand exactly what you're using it for. If you need a sense of control over your life, it's better to have that control over what goes into your body, what you put into your mind, and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis than trying to control other people's emotions, other people's actions, and then blaming it on them, so that hoping that they will change. Because that's a really unhealthy coping mechanism that I see a lot of people fall into, where it's like, well, I would have had a good day if that jerk hadn't cut me off on the way to work. It's like, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I think Dennis was going to say something.
Yeah, I wonder how much of our daily lives actually is in itself a coping mechanism. How much time, how much effort every day we're actually living through coping mechanisms, which, in essence is like a reactive situation, right? So there's some influence, some, stimuli in our life, and then we react to it with a specific coping mechanism from out of which we've shared a few. And so yeah, that thought just came,
I was just thinking, you made me think about my mom, because she's like, I wear the blue shirt because it's Tuesday or whatever. I probably said the wrong day. Mom, don't be mad at me. I wear this color shirt because it's this day of the week, and every day of the week has its colors. If you want to feel better during the day of the week, you wear this color. And I listen to this music for this reason, and I eat this food for this reason, and I sit in this spot for this reason. I wear this sweater for this reason. And there's always these little things, all day long that she does. Well, I have to do this because of this. I have to do this because of this. You know what I mean? All these little interdependencies.
So the definition, the psychological definition in psychology. Sorry, my words are not the best this last couple weeks. It is a noun. It's used in psychology, and coping mechanism is an adaptation to environmental stress that is based on conscious or unconscious choice, and that enhances control over behavior or gives a psychological comfort.
So in that regard, though, people that are utilizing coping mechanisms, are they avoiding the issue? I mean, would that be the synopsis of that? And if so, is there a way to bring that issue to light in a healthy way?
I would say so, because it's you see, like, so it is something reactive, and then the question for me is like, okay, like who is needing that coping mechanism? Like, who is having to do XYZ in order to cope with ABC? And so to me it seems like that's really part of a whole illusion, and that's something where we get caught in. That's something that we end up wearing stuff or doing things that we thought sometimes maybe even half a lifetime ago we had to do in order to cope with it. But is that even necessary? It's like, in my case, like, all right, do I have to spend time and share those pictures and memes and laugh about it? Like, is that really and truly, if I look at it and analyze it, no, it's not really necessary. I could just go on with life, or like maybe coping mechanisms in that way are a way of dealing with a situation that seems overwhelming to us. But are those coping mechanisms really addressing the situation? Are we seeing the thing that we feel like we have to cope with? Are we really looking at that and looking maybe at the value? Like, why is that stressing us out? Is it, is this stressing me out now because I should, I don't know, like, find some pictures and make fun of it and share with somebody in order to feel better? Or is that stressing me out because, maybe I shouldn't even confront myself with it, or maybe I should find a different way of looking at it in the first place without having to do something else to put up with it?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, a lot of people experience anxiety. It doesn't necessarily have to be a rational reason why they're experiencing stress or anxiety. It could be related to the trauma or something else, some other experience that they've had in their past, and they just feel that out of controlness, and that's enough for them to go to the coping mechanism.
It's a thing
But
of the
yeah.
mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you agree? Because that's the line of thought I had from the beginning. It's like, okay, the coping mechanism, like what, where does that come from? What is it? It's really the mind. So whether it's conscious or subconsciously, but it's the mind kind of, triggering you or telling you, okay, do this and do that, and you have to do ABC, and then you get stuck in, or you have to drink, or you have to go party in order to forget this and that. So it's not, it doesn't feel like it's my heart, it's not my belly telling me to do that. It's a mind thing. And the feeling that I have, if I catch myself, if I think about, Will, you said before, like think about something when you're really stressed out and when you have the feeling you're losing it, what are the things you do like to cope with that? And like I have to think hard even to find situations like that. But it's a mind thing. Then it's not really, it doesn't come from my heart, it doesn't come from my belly, and then it's something that really seems to trap us like in the mind, and then it gets ingrained and seems, it becomes habitual, and then we end up, creating habits and creating, vices or addictions, which were some of the, examples that we mentioned earlier. But if you really cut through it, then, it's the mind that keeps us in that trap.
Well, in a lot of cases too, I mean, the coping mechanism can kind of become almost a lifestyle that to some degree is pleasurable in comparison to the other options. And so a lot of people would potentially adopt that as their way of life and essentially never really come to addressing what is kind of the core issue behind what they're really dealing with, right?
That's what commercials are pushing, isn't it? Like they're pushing certain things because they say, oh, you're stressed out, you're this or that, you don't have a girlfriend or whatever, here, drive this car, I don't know, drink this thing, and you'll have it. So they're introducing or they're triggering those kind of coping mechanisms.
Interesting.
Xanax.
So I looked
You're
up
having
the
a stressful
definition
day?
of I looked up the definition of cope, and it says to struggle or deal, especially on fairly even terms or with some degree of success, and to face and deal with responsibilities, problems, or difficulties, especially successfully or in a calm and adequate manner. Meaning it's a technique that has worked, and it's allowing you to deal with something stressful. So to answer Mike's question from earlier, like when you're coping with something, there's something there that needs healed, and you're not really dealing with it. So yeah, you are avoiding healing, but maybe you're not ready. Maybe you do need a coping mechanism. Like for me, for some reason, I don't understand why I need something to help me with breathing regulation. It's hard for me to breathe on my own, especially when I'm stressed. I want to hold my breath. I want to restrain my body. And for a long time, I used cigarettes until the cigarettes got to be really unhealthy. And I started like hacking every morning when I woke up. And I was just like, I feel like crap. This coping mechanism, I can't use it anymore. It's not going to be effective for me. So I had to switch. But if you don't understand your coping mechanisms, you're never going to really truly understand how to replace them with a healthier coping mechanism, something that actually is helping you cope adequately and better throughout the years. Because eventually coping mechanisms, you build up a tolerance for them. Like if you're drinking every time you're getting stressed out, eventually you're going to have a tolerance to alcohol. And you're going to need to drink more. You're going to need to find something else. This is a common cycle that happens is the healing starts when your coping mechanisms stop working.
So who needs coping? And in terms of which part of you is the one that needs the coping? And if you think you need coping, so who's the one who's thinking that he needs or she needs coping, and that means that you identify with the one that needs the coping. And then what happens if you cease to identify with the one that you think needs coping? And is there something that's beyond the one that thinks that he or she needs coping? And is that maybe one of the keys to, you know, to break through coping mechanisms? And if you look at people that, you know, that stop, I don't know, like drinking or smoking or doing certain things, like from, you know, in one moment, just like that, and you talk to them, then you find out that there was a shift on the inside, and that it wasn't some kind of, you know, I think magic pill or so, but that shift that is possible. I would say, like, there's a possibility for that to happen in every moment. That shift on the inside led them to cease identifying with the person or with the identity that they assumed they had, that needed the coping.
So in parts therapy, or IFS, the internal family system, the part who is needing to cope could be your managers. Well, they're all protective parts, but it could be a manager or a firefighter. So if they're using the coping mechanism to manage your day-to-day life, this is where inner critics come in. You know, when they tell you that, oh, if you don't do this, if you don't make that, you know, perfect A in class, then you're going to be a failure. That's a coping mechanism. That's a method to push you to do your very best. Otherwise, you're going to be a failure. These parts, these protective parts, use coping mechanisms to either manage an exile or put out fires that the exile is triggering, which would be like flashbacks and, you know, actual, you know, severe triggers that you have trouble coping with or dealing with at all.
That reminds me of, you know, MK Ultra or like Monarch Mind programming, where I then feel, are those coping mechanisms, you know, that in you know, in those examples are being purposefully triggered, or would you identify those as coping mechanisms as well? You know, the splitting of the personality, the reactions that are being triggered with those, you know, really terrible torture methods, that the splitting of personalities, and then, you know, the kind of programming that they are putting into people. Are they using a coping mechanism that of the mind, of the human body, in order to, you know, kind of jump on top of it and hijack the being, so to speak?
I would say yes. I'm not sure if they're piggybacking off of the human reaction to learn how to cope. We are surviving machines. We are built to learn how to survive from day one. This is a big issue with childhood trauma survivors, where they don't understand why they still care about the people who have abused them. And in a lot of cases, it's because it was their caretaker. And it's a biological imperative that when you are under a certain age, you have to create a bond with your caretaker. You don't have a choice. For the child's mind to think that my caretaker is inadequate, is neglectful, is downright abusive, can't take care of me, that reality is, there's no coping mechanism that they know how to handle that with. There is no, like, it's impossible. That can't happen. So the coping mechanism there is for the child to believe that they're doing something wrong. They're the one that's damaged. And that's why their parent can't do the things that they need to do, or that, you know, they need. A lot of psychological tactics are based around triggering people's coping mechanisms.
So that seems to make it even more important to, you know, to identify your own coping mechanisms, and you know, look at yourself and see how to cope with those coping mechanisms.
You reminded me of commercials about drugs, where it's like, do you feel depressed? Do you have this problem? Do you have that problem? Why don't you have a conversation? Go talk to your doctor about it. That's triggering a coping mechanism. It's triggering the need to open up and talk to another person about the struggles that you're facing. So they're triggering that coping mechanism, and then they're going to try and sell you some drugs that will make that go away instead of actually teaching you how to truly cope with it and deal with it long enough until you can actually heal it. Mike, you look
So
like
the
you had
coping,
something to say.
so the coping mechanism is kind of a short-term bridge from dealing with or initially being hit by a particular problem or stress to the point that you can start to identify what the problem actually is and how to resolve it long term.
Yes.
Would that be
Just
uh, a better or healthier way to think about coping mechanisms? Because if you're taking your coping mechanism and making it part of your life, then you're not really using it as a bridge, you're using it as your life.
I would agree that that is the healthier way to look at it. I'm not going to lie, though, there are certain things that I will probably always have to use as a coping mechanism, like breathing techniques. Anytime I'm too stressed out, I have to remind myself to focus on my breathing, because otherwise I will get too stressed out and I won't be able to function. My brain will get all fuzzy. I'm just not going to be able to think coherently, and I'm aware of this. So, like the breathing regulation for me, hopefully I won't have to do it with a vape. Like, this is the coping mechanism for now. But in reality, the true coping mechanism is learning how to regulate my breathing. That's
so
the healthiest, the most long-term coping mechanism that is healthiest for my body.
So coping mechanisms then would be a survival mechanism. So something happens of us, like to us, we feel or we are overwhelmed. Whether it's perceived or whether it's like a true thing, and whether it is on a physical level, whether it's like on an emotional level or on a mental level, we are overwhelmed, and then we have these coping mechanisms, setting in, and so we don't even have to label them. Oh, they're positive, they're negative. Some of them are like accepted, some or more accepted in society, in the part of the world that we live in, and some not. But what it boils down to me is that like you mentioned, the breathing techniques, which is like really powerful. They're like tremendously like powerful techniques, and they can take you far. But then I feel that there's a difference, and in recognizing the importance and the it has, and the well-being it can create, and the connection that you can create through breathing with with yourself basically, and the centering and all the benefits you have from it. But then if you were if you would be in the moment, in awareness, if you would be aware, then I figure you wouldn't have to think of breathing. You wouldn't have to, okay, let me focus on this breathing technique, I'm going to use this and that, but you would just breathe. You understand? So like, it doesn't take away from the value of this or of any other coping mechanisms that we have. But I feel if we could live in the awareness of the moment, of truly being, of what is happening to us, then maybe instead of feeling the need or having to come up with a survival mechanism, we would be in that awareness of, there is no survival situation even here. And that ties in like kind of neatly with what we were talking about on Monday, like the difference between the fight and flight, which is created for a short period, as to rest and digest. So if we were able to center ourselves in that kind of rest and digest, for the most part of our life, of our, like it's seemingly it's supposed to be, because if you look at nature, animals, like most of the time, are in rest and digest, unless they are like in a like I would say like rare situation of survival, where they would have to fight for their life or jump to the side. Then that's obviously like a survival mechanism kicking in. But nowadays, like we seem to be kept, maybe artificially, by whom, by which structures, by which people, in that survival mode, which then triggers continuous coping mechanisms, which then would explain also why we're seemingly overwhelmed by all those needs for those coping mechanisms to be running continuously. So I feel there's a lot of value in actually becoming aware of our coping mechanisms, and this theme of today is really something that we can learn to cut through that, and to really you make a shift on the inside and learn how to center ourselves in the kind of rest and digest, where we can be aware of what's happening, where we can breathe however way we feel, because we are in the moment and not because of a technique that we learned.
Kind of along that same line, one of the things that this discussion brought up in my mind is Robert Lustig. He's got a book called Hacking the American Mind, and he talks about the 4 C's to happiness: connect, let's see, what is it? Connect, contribute, cope, and cook are the 4 C's. Obviously, coping is one of those things, but one of the things he says here, I'll just read like a little bit of an entry part to his website. It says, America's corporate consumption complex has deliberately confused us to believe pleasure and happiness as the same. They are anything but. Think open happiness, happy meals, happy hour, the like button, the smiling emojis. Corporations have hacked our bodies and brains, and we've become fat, sick, stupid, broke, addicted, depressed, and most decidedly unhappy. So he's, in that book, he's suggesting that, there is a concerted effort to really kind of steer us in a particular way where we're essentially addicted to coping mechanisms that the system has set up to profit from. And so to a large degree, those are the unhealthy coping mechanisms, in my opinion. Whereas, what he's saying with the 4 C's, which he includes coping, is that there's another version. And like in his thing, he talks about, getting enough sleep, getting good exercise, taking mental breaks where you're, taking time to really think and meditate about what it is that's going on. And so those are some essential things that we need. We certainly need to cope with things and handle things that come up in our lives, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's just that we've got all these bad options that essentially are pushed right into our face. And for a large part of the population, they're utilizing this and to some degree not understanding that this isn't a lifestyle choice. This is something different. They're being herded into coping mechanisms that aren't healthy.
And a side effect of coping mechanisms, of losing yourself in those coping mechanisms, or of, being lost in them without even being aware of it, is predictability, isn't it? Because if you have a coping mechanism, let's say like you watch TV 4 hours every time you get stressed out, then there's a way of figuring that out that will make you predictable. And there certainly is people and organizations that benefit or can benefit, which is also why they're pushing it, certain things, certain coping mechanisms from that. And then the more predictable you are, the less you are in the moment, the less you are in charge of your life. And, the easier it is for other people to figure you out, even on a more deeper level, and to basically control and steer your life.
This is why it's all the laws surrounding like to-go alcohol during quarantine. Where did those go? All of a sudden there's bars saying, come get a 6-pack, take it on out of my house, get it out, take it to your car, take it to your house. Why is that legal, but going to church is not? One coping mechanism. This is why in 1984 they're handed gin and cigarettes. It's because it's a coping mechanism. It's the strangest thing. Go ahead.
I would say, like in the military, there is a huge coping mechanism that's promoted, and that's just alcoholism. Alcoholism is like rampant in the military, and it is a high stress situation. but you're never going to see them like ban alcohol or like stop giving soldiers alcohol. That's probably the first thing that they're going to, they're going to give them all those bad things. And I think to some degree, as we move into a more totalitarian state, you can look at the military as kind of a experiment, or a first version of the experiment of what they're going to get from that. So like if you put more pressure on people and you've established that what they do when they're under stress, as Dennis mentioned, they become predictable, and they predictably go to these coping mechanisms. And of course, those guys that are set up with those businesses are going to improve their business. But that's not healthy.
And the true healthy coping mechanisms, they're not taught, because the healthiest coping mechanism requires that you be fully aware of what you're trying to cope with. And when you become aware of what you're trying to cope with, you start realizing there are better coping mechanisms than the one you're using. And you start to dig your way out of the hole. And that's not what anyone who's weaponizing trauma against people or weaponizing stress against people, they don't want you to do that. They want to keep you in that state because you're easy to control, you're easy to manipulate. You make predictable decisions as long as you understand what's going on. This drives me crazy about trauma survivors and how people perceive them. They are perceived as irrational, crazy, insane people. But when you look at what they're coping with, what they're trying to do, they don't seem so crazy. It makes sense. Like, there was not an instance. I heard a example of this guy who he hated going to a certain restaurant. He would make any excuse to get out of it. And he would almost do it unconsciously, where all of a sudden, if he couldn't find a valid reason, he'd get sick. And he'd be like, no, man, I'm feeling sick. I can't go to this, I can't go out to eat. No, sorry. After quite a few months, maybe even like a year or so of therapy, come to find out that was the place that he found out that his parents were getting divorced. And his subconscious mind was like, all right, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the emotions surrounding that. So I'm just going to cope with that by avoiding it. To an average person who's hanging out with him, it'd be like, why? Why do you hate going to this place? You don't hate the food. You have no reason to avoid this place. Nothing bad has ever happened to you. Like, what's going on? You seem kind of crazy. But in reality, when you think about like what people are coping with, it makes rational sense. It's just not based on the present time. It's based on in the past.
Would you agree if I say that for a coping mechanism to set in with yourself or to take place in your life, it requires a prerequisite for that is a disassociation from your true natural being, from your true divine state. If you disassociated yourself from that, then you're not identifying with that again. You see yourself as something, as somebody else, and then you feel that you cannot handle the situation. However, if you truly settled, I'm divine being, I'm made of the same material, eat or whatever, that everything else around me is being made out of. So everything that comes on to me, it was meant to be, in a way, like I have the ability on some kind of level, even if I cannot perceive it right now, to handle it, to deal with it. And there is no then if I'm centered in that, then there is no need to do anything or to take on some kind of habit or to or to use any technique that I would have learned or so, because then it's just and like as the picture that I'm getting is, sometimes you see two persons, two beings, and they are under, let's say, like a traumatic or difficult situation, and one of them will cope with it just fine and will just go on and might not even perceive it to that degree, and the other one is totally devastated. And the difference was not in the situation, because the situation seemingly was the same. But the like one person can cope with it, and if you talk to him or her about it, it's like, wow, like oh, you're under so much stress, and how do you how do you cope with this? How do you get along with this? And like, well, no, I'm not. I'm just I'm all right. Like, I'm good here. These let's say, like, these are my children. They don't stress me out. They are who they are, and I'm good with that. Or this guy, oh yeah, he shouted at me, or he did this and that, but that's what he always does, and that's okay with me. It's like I accept what it is, and I couldn't change it in a moment. And like, but you see, like he or she would experience the same waves, but not being moved by them in the way that the one next to him is being moved and shaken up, and gets angry, and later on has to work out the anger again and find something to cope with the anger, with the depression of that. And I think that's the kind of picture that I'm getting. So it's not really the outside stimuli or the waves or the ups and downs of life, but it's whether we identify with it, and whether we disassociate from the fact that we are part of all that is happening around us.
So I would say that that's really having a self-knowledge and understanding of yourself is really tantamount to being in the best position to cope with any situation, right?
Yes.
And then the chances of having to create a coping mechanism is very minute. And to a large extent, people that are not in that case, they're not in that situation, are really given a choice between like what coping mechanisms they can choose from, because they're going to have to use coping mechanisms. And unfortunately, most are making bad choices.
I would say they're
Even-
making choices, whether they're bad or they're good. That's, again, it's a label. Because I'm not saying, oh, if like I'm putting myself somewhere, above anybody else or so, but it's, if you, whatever the mechanism or the coping mechanism that will set in is, or whatever your reaction to, to the waves, to the shaking, to the ups and down is, as long as you are all right with it, as long as you can see yourself and feel and live through it, and okay, that's what happening to me. Okay, like I'm in tears and I'm crying, and let's say somebody passed away, and that doesn't mean like I'm gonna try to block it and try not to live it, and try not to feel the pain and feel the what's coming up on all my levels as a human being. But it would mean then to be okay, to be in order with it, then even the disorder, the perceived turbulence, is part of something greater that's happening. And having trust, which was something we discussed also recently, trust in that which is happening is happening for a reason. There's something beyond that. There's something for me to grow, to learn with, and I can position myself. I can find traction. I can find a foundation. I can again, and just to be, to stay in that observing mode, and to stay in that wouldn't mean for me to not develop any kind of coping mechanisms, but it just would mean even throughout that to observe. Okay, I feel like eating chocolate right now. Okay, I feel like I have to talk to this one, and I have to whatever it is, but to stay in that observer mode, and therefore not to be completely taken up by the coping mechanism, because that will then retain the opportunity for you to step out of the coping mechanism, because you're not completely, I'm zoning in, I'm drinking right now, and that's who I am, and I'm the drinker, and I'm the alcohol, whatever, or I'm the one who watches TV, and that's just who I am, and I can't get out of it. No, that's what I'm doing. That's what's happening to me right now. It's okay, and as soon as it's not okay with me, I can do something else. So you retain that ability to step out of it at the same.
So, Mike, when you were saying, like, a lot of the coping mechanisms that people choose, they're bad habits, they're bad choices. I don't disagree with, like, well, I guess I do kind of disagree. I'm trying to figure out how to say it delicately without, like, you're not wrong. A lot of these coping mechanisms are not the healthiest for us, and by that definition, it makes them bad choices. But if you think, like, throw that in the trash can and think about coping mechanisms as their only priority is getting you through this moment.
Yep.
if it's going to sound really stupid, but if the only way to get you through like a really terrible moment right then that second, you don't have any other way of handling it, which one are you going to do? Are you going to say, you know what, I'm going to drink that glass of alcohol, or I'm going to not make it through this? Like, if those are your two choices, drinking the glass of alcohol in your mind is the higher priority, because it's going to get you to the next day, so that the next
Yeah.
day you have the opportunity to possibly change. This isn't to say that it's okay just to continue using these coping mechanisms that are being detrimental to you. It's
Yeah.
understanding that is the coping mechanism, its priority is to keep you alive to the next day.
Right. So in that moment, that's the healthy choice, right?
In that moment, if you have no other choice, if you can't think of another choice, the only other choice is to not exist and to not be able to deal with that, which is way more unhealthy, I would say, than drinking the glass of alcohol. But if you can acknowledge that you're using a coping mechanism and that it isn't healthy for you, maybe the next day after that, you can decide to get some therapy and put off drinking that alcohol just for the day,
Yeah.
if you
You
can
know,
manage it.
go ahead, Dennis.
And it's also, it's accepting that, okay, in this moment, just with the eating that we all had some time ago as well, in this moment I drink the alcohol, or I don't know, like I bite off the piece of whatever food it is, bad food, you know, but in the
Twinkies.
consciousness that this is, you know, that's what I need right now, that's what I crave, that's what's gonna do good, that's what's gonna do well for me right now. Because worse than that is if you eat it and you think, oh my God, that is so terrible, this is going to destroy me, this is going to do this and that. Because then again, you create, you know, that kind of
You
dissociation.
create
That
more
kind of,
stress that you need to cope with, instead of actually getting. I run into this all the time, where I have a session with someone, and then immediately after they are exhausted and they are very hungry. And I tell them, if you can manage to stay away from the sugar and the carbs, try to eat something a little bit healthier, like an egg. Or, you know, if you're going to have some toast, put an egg on top of it. You know, try a healthier coping mechanism. And if those aren't working, you still know what works. I would avoid life-threatening things, like, you know, one of my coping mechanisms when I first figured out, or when I first started self-medicating, was Xanax and alcohol. I don't know how I survived. I'm a tiny girl. There's no reason, like, I'm surprised I'm alive. That's all I can say, is that was my coping mechanism. And no, I'm not going to advocate for that, but I fully understand why I was using it. And at some point, I decided that it wasn't going to work for me anymore, that I couldn't do that anymore. It was going to risk my life. And that's what I was using the coping mechanism to lengthen, was I need to make it to tomorrow.
Yeah. And you know, unfortunately people do, you know, when it comes to choices, making good choices, people aren't necessarily prepared with, you know, just an open slate of good and bad choices. A lot of them are suffering from trauma and other things, which to a large extent may blind them to many of the good choices and really kind of lead them into a lot of the bad choices. And certainly, you know, a negative mindset, a scarcity mindset, is also one in which, you know, leads to a lot of poor choices. So, you know, in a lot of cases, people are kind of herded down the path to bad choices. And, you know, I guess this is the other thing that we haven't really talked about, but really there's community, you know, like, I can say that when I was a heavy alcoholic, one of the things that kept me going, kept going into the alcoholism, was the fact that there was other people that were doing it too, and we were all happier together because we were all together, and we just kept meeting every night to get drunk together. And you know, to some degree there's a healthy component to community, but there's also a negative component to community. What do you think about that?
That's what we call trauma bonding. That's when you're looking for something that's healthy. Like the desire is to find a community where you feel seen and heard and accepted, and you're picking up on that you are seen, heard, and accepted. So a lot of times people will drink together as a way to bond together. They only know how to hang out with each other when they're drunk. This happens a lot of times when you have stopped drinking and you go to hang out with your old friends, or if you stop doing, serious other drugs, and all of a sudden you're hanging out with people who are doing them, but you're not. It's not the same. It's not the same feeling. And this is something that just happens all the time. But
Oh, I can definitely attest to that. Yeah.
I consider that a cluster of coping mechanisms. You need to drink to hang out with people, but you also know that you can drink and hang out with people as a coping mechanism. I like to say that we have something in our life that we need to cope with, and then we have coping mechanisms for that coping mechanism. So when disassociation happens, for me, what I like to do is when I start feeling that way, I will like to just be alone. I will isolate because I don't want people to know. So I'm dealing with a coping mechanism of disassociating. Obviously, I'm disassociating for some reason, even if I don't understand why. It's a protective measure. My brain says, you don't need to be here. This isn't for you. You need to check out. And so I do it. But to deal with the fact that I know that I'm disassociating, I will go hide. So I have coping mechanisms for my coping mechanisms. And it takes a very serious level of self-awareness and self-confidence, and have a real self-esteem, not a provisional self-esteem, but a true self-esteem, to accept that you are a human being. You have developed coping mechanisms because that is how we learn how to survive. That is how we survive. And you have to accept your coping mechanisms and decide whether you are okay with them or not.
I feel the question really that lies on the base of what you just said, and what Mike, you also touched upon, is how can we break the perception of having limited choices? Because just like you said, the coping mechanisms kick in when we're not able to look left and right and to take our time and reflect, and because something's happening, poof, and we only see one exit. And we only see, oh, that's the drinking, it's the this, it's the that we have to do the isolating. And how can we break, that perception? Because the perception still, because choice is there and many opportunities are there all around us. But what is the difference, within us, whether we can see just the one way or the two way, or whether we can see that infinite, array of possibilities that is all around us all time. And I think community is one of a super important factor of that, because then again, surrounding yourself with the right people, with the right environment. Sometimes it's not even people, but it's the right place. Surrounding yourself and being in the right space that then inspires you, that then shows you the beauty and the opportunity of life. I think that is a key factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of those things where being able to understand the circumstances for those of us that are aware, and just communicating a level of awareness to other people in circumstances where they have difficulties, or they are kind of caught in that treadmill kind of circumstance with coping mechanisms, is a way that you can at least offer them an alternative, that now they might start to consider that there are other choices that can be made.
Yeah, it's really, again, it's the awareness of the moment, and like maybe a technique would be to ask yourself, is this, whatever you're doing in this moment, is this, opening up the space? Is this, amplifying the vision that you have? Is this like making you perceive everything that's going on in this moment? Or is this something that limits you? And then to kind of check in, make this a habit, to whatever you do, like every step that you take, basically, okay, is this direction, is this opening up, space for me, or is this something that closes me down? Is that something that narrows, my vision, my perception of life?
And then
Well,
you
we're
have to
closing in
decide-
on the, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add a little bit. Like, then you have to decide
Sure.
which one you need. If you feel like you're going to just lose your shit, and like from experience, I've known people who have literally run out of doctor's offices, like jumped up and ran. So like some coping mechanisms are not the best, but also like sometimes you can't stop it. So you have to decide. For me, like I used to use alcohol as a regular thing. I would just drink on a regular basis, not like too much, although there were quite a few times where I definitely had alcohol poisoning. I cut back, but that doesn't mean that I don't ever drink ever again. I'm just aware, like, I'm really craving some alcohol today. Maybe this is why. All right, I'm going to try not to do that, but I'm also going to be aware. So like one thing is that if I have to put on pants, like tight pants, jeans, you could bet your ass I've got some alcohol in my system, because I know it works. If I put the pants on and I don't need the alcohol, cool. But if I know that I'm having a bad day and I can feel it, I'm aware that it's creeping up to a point where I just can't handle anymore, my options are either go home, and if I don't want to do that, I can have a glass of alcohol. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the self-control to stop doing it. Like I wouldn't do that with heroin. Not a good idea. But you also have to decide whether that coping mechanism is something that you want to do at that moment or not. Some people are willing to trade. There's some days where I'm really stressed out and I'm like, man, I really want that cigarette. That sounds really good. And there have been days where I've broken down and I'm like, I need a cigarette to get through this. But halfway through the cigarette, I'm like, I thought I wanted this, but I didn't. But I still kind of struggle with the alcohol a little bit. It's not a cut and dry kind of thing.
So I think to summarize, and honestly, I'm really kind of impressed where we went with this, because I didn't know exactly where this was all going to head. But after having the discussion, I think we definitely provided some real value here today. But just to summarize this, I think the idea here is that coping mechanisms aren't necessarily good or bad. They may be necessary in a lot of different cases, and seriously necessary in some cases. But the idea is to recognize the coping mechanism and take time or schedule time to understand and meditate on what exactly is really going on behind the scenes, to really gain more self-knowledge, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-awareness, and grow yourself into a better situation. Certainly some of the healthier things that can be done in regard to dealing with things like stress are getting enough sleep, getting a good regimen of exercise, taking healthy mental breaks, and getting back to nature and those sorts of things. But with all that said, it's certainly an area that definitely needs some attention too, because unfortunately most people are dealing with some situations that they don't feel that they're in control of, and so therefore they're utilizing coping mechanisms.
I think that was really well said. And the picture that I'm getting is, shed your light upon it. So if you put awareness of it, if you observe it, you don't have to label them. You don't have to condemn yourself for the mechanism itself. It's just, oh, it's there. All right. Every time I'm stressed out, my mind just seems to run around in circles, and it's, getting crazy. And I'm not like, I'm not feeling my heart and my belly is like just all is in my mind, and my thoughts are wild, and I can't sleep, and I can't stop doing stuff. And just leave it right there and say, okay, that's interesting. That's always like, that's interesting to me to say, oh, that's really interesting. Like I didn't even perceive that before. And just the looking at something, just the perception of something that's going on which you didn't perceive, consciously before, that makes a tremendous difference, and that maybe that is all the difference you need, because whether you keep on observing it for a moment or for a day or a month for 10 years, but there will be change and it will impact it in whichever way. That is what life will determine in the end for you. But yeah, because you don't want to create even more friction, more waste by saying, oh, this is bad. Oh my God, this is bad for myself. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't. But it's happening. It's right here. It's right there. That's really interesting. I wonder where this come from. And then you start asking like some quality questions. And then if you ask good questions, you're gonna get good answers as well.
All right, that sounds good. So we're actually past the top of the hour. So definitely want to thank the audience for their time and attention. We apologize for the kind of the strange little opening and kind of late start for today's show, but we do the best that we can. We're coping with the circumstances we had in place. But with
And we
that
are
said,
always looking for better coping mechanisms.
all right, yeah, definitely that. Yeah, so we will return on Monday, 5:35 Eastern time, 2:35 Pacific. Not exactly sure what the show is, but we'll be there, right?
Yeah.
Does anybody have a okay? we'll
Say, I
see
don't
what happens
remember.
next.
I don't
We'll
know what
raise
we're
excellence
talking
in some
about.
way.
Yeah, but we'll be there or here
Raising excellence.
somewhere.
All right. So who hits the stop button?
I will hit it, but I
No.
assume that we should probably say goodbye for a second.
Okay.
So let me find the button. Okay, there's the stop button. So all right.
Thank you very much, guys.